In a bold and unprecedented move, Canada has unleashed a $110 billion energy retaliation against the United States, completely shifting the landscape of North American trade relations. This is no ordinary trade dispute. It's a high-stakes battle between two of the world's largest and most influential economies. It all started with Donald Trump's aggressive tariffs on Canadian imports. What began as a series of tensions escalated into a full-blown trade war when Ontario, Canada's industrial powerhouse, launched a retaliatory strike in the form of a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to the U.S. But this trade conflict isn't just about energy. It's a dramatic clash that touches on politics, economics, and national sovereignty. At its core, this is a showdown between two countries whose economies are deeply interconnected, but whose political landscapes have shifted in ways that could redefine future relations. The stakes are higher than ever, with Mark Carney stepping into the political spotlight as Canada's new Prime Minister. What does this bold move mean for the future of North American trade? And what role will energy play in the ultimate resolution of this conflict? Let's break it down and analyze how tensions between Canada and the U.S. escalated so quickly, and why the fallout from these economic maneuvers will have far-reaching consequences for both nations. Trade tensions between the United States and Canada had been simmering for years, but it wasn't until former President Donald Trump imposed aggressive tariffs that the situation boiled over. Early in March, Trump unveiled a sweeping 25% tariff on Canadian and Mexican imports, focusing on industries critical to Canada such as steel, aluminum, lumber, and dairy. For Canada, this move was nothing short of a direct assault on its economic sovereignty. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was quick to condemn the tariffs, declaring them a betrayal of the close relationship between the two nations. Trump, on the other hand, argued that Canada was exploiting favorable trade agreements at the expense of American manufacturers and workers, especially in key sectors like steel and aluminum. This unilateral move sent shockwaves through the Canadian economy. Industries that relied heavily on exports to the U.S. saw their costs increase dramatically, making Canadian goods less competitive in the American market. For Canada, the impact was immediate, and it became clear that Trump's tariffs were not just an economic move. They were a deliberate effort to challenge Canada's trade policies and its standing on the global stage. But perhaps the most stunning part of this trade war was Ontario's response, an unexpected and forceful retaliation that would change the dynamics of this dispute. Ontario's 25% surcharge on electricity exports to the U.S. was a strategic move that few saw coming. The province, which is one of Canada's largest exporters of energy, especially electricity, turned the tables by directly targeting American consumers. States like Minnesota, Michigan, and New York, which rely heavily on Canadian energy, were immediately hit with significantly higher electricity bills. The surcharge could add upwards of $100 to the average monthly utility bill in these states, and experts estimate that it will generate between $300,000 and $400,000 in daily revenue for Ontario. The intention behind this move was clear. Ontario was using its energy exports as leverage to hurt American consumers and send a message to President Trump. Premier Doug Ford of Ontario didn't mince words when discussing the decision. He told the press that the American people hadn't asked for this trade war. It was Trump's doing. Ford made it clear that the surcharge was a response to U.S. aggression, and he didn't rule out further increases should Trump escalate the trade conflict with additional tariffs. The political ramifications were swift. Michigan's officials warned of potential power grid instability, and New York's Governor Kathy Hochul launched an investigation into the surcharge's impact on local consumers. In Minnesota, Governor Tim Walz criticized the tariffs, accusing Trump of economic recklessness. Ford's actions, however, went beyond just protecting Ontario's interests. The surcharge represented a shift in Canada's broader trade strategy, a signal that the country was no longer willing to passively accept U.S. economic aggression. Ontario's retaliatory move set the stage for an escalating confrontation, and it set a new tone for Canada's relationship with the U.S. Ontario's bold tariff response occurred at a critical juncture in Canadian politics. Justin Trudeau's resignation paved the way for Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, to become Canada's new Prime Minister. Carney's leadership represents a dramatic shift in Canada's economic strategy, and his approach to trade policy has already caused ripples across the border. Carney is no stranger to managing economic crises. With his extensive experience in global finance, he is well versed in navigating complex trade negotiations. He has vowed to take a firm stance against U.S. trade aggression, pledging that retaliatory tariffs will remain in place until the U.S. commits to fair and reciprocal trade practices. One of Carney's key objectives is to strengthen Canada's energy sector and reduce its reliance on American markets. He has openly expressed his ambition to make Canada an energy superpower. leveraging its vast natural resources to assert economic dominance in future trade negotiations. But not everyone is on board with Carney's aggressive approach. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has been vocal in his criticism, accusing Carney of a lack of transparency and warning that his strategy could destabilize Canada's financial system. Despite this opposition, Carney's strong backing from the Liberal Party, combined with his global economic credentials, gives him the political capital needed to push through a transformative economic agenda. Carney's tough stance has already made waves in the U.S., where many are questioning how Trump will respond to Canada's newly assertive trade policies. The imposition of Ontario's tariffs has triggered immediate backlash in the U.S. While the trade war began with Trump's tariffs on Canadian goods, Ontario's retaliatory measures have shifted the focus to the energy sector. American utility companies are warning of higher electricity costs, particularly in states like Michigan, Minnesota, and New York, which rely on Canadian energy exports to meet their demand. The Michigan Public Service Commission has raised concerns about potential disruptions to the state's power grid. Officials worry that the surcharges could strain local infrastructure and make the state more vulnerable to cyber attacks if the energy flow from Canada is interrupted. The economic fallout has been felt across the board, with political leaders in affected states decrying Trump's trade policies. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz has called the tariffs economic warfare, urging President Trump to reconsider his strategy. New York Governor Kathy Hochul, too, has slammed the tariffs as reckless, blaming them for unnecessary economic instability. Despite these growing concerns, Trump remains defiant. He has labeled Ontario's surcharge a hostile act and has threatened to retaliate with more tariffs on Canadian goods. As the trade war intensifies, uncertainty reigns in U.S. financial markets, with investors bracing for further disruptions in cross-border trade. The impact of this trade dispute is already being felt in the U.S. political sphere. The growing economic instability caused by the tariffs is making trade policy a key issue in upcoming elections. Voters in key swing states, where the economy is heavily dependent on trade with Canada, may increasingly view the trade war as a deciding factor in how they cast their ballots. Ontario's energy tariffs are just the beginning. Premier Doug Ford has hinted at additional retaliatory measures, including potential tariffs on American food products, alcohol, and automotive exports. But the most significant threat is the possibility of Canada reducing or cutting off energy exports to the U.S. altogether. As a major energy supplier, Canada holds substantial leverage in this trade war. Canada exports approximately 4 million barrels of oil per day to the U.S., and any disruption in this flow could send energy prices soaring. Ford has openly referred to Canada's energy exports as a trump card, signaling that Canada is prepared to use its energy resources to pressure the U.S. government if the trade conflict escalates further. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Mark Carney is pursuing a broader strategy to reduce Canada's dependence on the U.S. market. His plan includes expanding renewable energy production, securing trade agreements with Asian and European markets, and building new pipelines to strengthen Canada's energy infrastructure. If successful, these measures could give Canada greater negotiating power and reduce the country's reliance on the U.S. for trade. Canada's $110 billion energy retaliation has completely reshaped the North American trade dynamics. The bold response by Ontario has exposed the vulnerability of U.S. energy markets and highlighted Canada's readiness to stand up against U.S. economic aggression. As Mark Carney takes the reins, Canada is moving toward greater economic independence, building a robust energy sector, and diversifying its trade partnerships. The big question now is how the U.S. will respond. Will President Trump escalate the conflict with more tariffs, or will political pressure force him to reconsider his approach? And how will Canada's new strategy of energy dominance and diversification affect its future in global trade? The outcome of this trade war will likely shape the future of Canada-U.S. relations for years to come. For now, both nations are on a collision course, each testing the limits of their economic and political power. Will Canada's tough stance force Trump to back down, or is this just the beginning of a deeper trade war? Only time will tell. This trade conflict is more than just a series of tariffs and retaliations. It's a dramatic turning point in the relationship between two of the world's largest economies. With the leadership of Mark Carney, Canada is positioning itself as a force to be reckoned with in the global trade arena. The outcome of this standoff could have profound implications not just for North America, but for the broader global economic order. As tensions continue to rise, the world will be watching closely. The question now is how far both sides are willing to push, and whether the conflict will result in a new era of trade diplomacy or a prolonged and destructive trade war. What's your take on this trade standoff? Will Canada's tough stance change the future of U.S.-Canada relations? Or are we heading toward a deeper and more complicated conflict? Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe to stay updated on this ongoing trade saga.